This is the first of our little kind of tutorials on how to best use ArtMatic Designer. And we're going to start off pretty simply with a tour of the interface. And this will be interesting for people who are new to the application, but also if you are an ArtMatic user and you haven't yet upgraded to CTX, you'll probably find out some kind of new and interesting things. The interface has changed a little bit, bit more streamlined, a few extra things under the hood. So I'm just going to go really simply and explain what you're seeing when you first boot your screen up. At the moment, I have here, I've just made a very simple system. Normally when ArtMatic boots, you'll see a random screen. It will come up completely randomly, and sometimes you get something really funky. Sometimes it's just nothing. It is truly a random experience, but we kind of like that in Designer. I'm going to first start and show you these 4 tabs up the top here. These are basically the rooms, what we call the rooms of Designer or ArtMatic. We have 4 rooms. Most people will be fairly, if you've used the app before, you'll be fairly familiar with 3 of these rooms, and there's one that's reasonably new. So we'll go from the left-hand end. We have the browser. So this is the ArtMatic browser. This will boot up automatically a whole selection of links to the libraries that come with ArtMatic Designer. These are really great things to play with, to explore, and even to learn things from. These are all little modules that Eric has designed. So you can select any of these that you like, that take your fancy. And then once you have something in this window that you think looks interesting, you can just double click on that and it will bring it into the design room. And then you'll see you have now over here a structure tree which you can play with. The design room is where we spend, or where I spend most of my time. And if you're a user of ArtMatic Designer, this is probably where you'll spend a lot of your time in here. But we also have a relatively new area, which is the Explore room. If you're a user of ArtMatic Explorer, this is what you'll see, and you won't have the option to see the other parts of the interface. You'll just see this, and this is for this is a new kind of idea for people who really want to have a bit of a play around with ArtMatic but don't want to be too overwhelmed with the structure trees. So those 3, and then last of all we have a listen room, and the listen room is for the audio side of ArtMatic. So ArtMatic can also create audio. I'm not a real expert in the audio side of it because I don't use it that much, but I mostly spend my time in the design room, but it can create some sort of interesting and spectacular audio, which you can sync with your ArtMatic movies when you're outputting them, if you so wish. So that's what those 4 tabs do. You'll probably be mostly, as I say, working in the design room, and that's where we're going to spend most of the time as we go through this little tutorial. On the left-hand side, we have a bunch of icons. Mostly these control the outputs and the way that ArtMatic actually interfaces with the file system. You've got a standard, oh, and I should also just point out too that we have, down the bottom here, we have a tooltip bar. So when you'll see as I put my mouse over these icons, you'll see that we've got little things that come up that tell you what they are. One thing that's important to be aware of with this new version of CTX is that when you boot ArtMatic first time, it can go to full screen and you may lose that. So it's always a good idea just to, if you need the tooltips, just bring your window just up a little bit so you can see this little blue line and you'll get all the tooltips. So we have, you know, your standard open and save icons. These just function as ways for you to save things. And open files, no problems there, we all understand that. The eye icon that's sitting underneath these is actually an icon which is designed to do a full screen render. So if you click on this eye, you'll get a full screen render of whatever is in your workspace. I'm going to just, I have a little file here just to make is simpler. I'm just going to go back to this little file. This is just a very, very simple Gaussian circle. There's nothing fancy about this, just to keep our interface nice and tidy as we go. Yeah, so that's your full screen render very quickly. Very quick when you do something simple like that. On a more complex workspace image, it will take a little longer for you to kind of see your full screen render happen, but it's pretty snappy most of the time. And then we get into some of your ways of outputting your work from ArtMatic. So rather than just saving and loading your ArtMatic file, these are your session files for ArtMatic. These are for outputting your images and your movies. So this icon is for outputting images, saving images. You'll see a bunch of different options here. You can change the size to which you render your image. Lots of different presets there for you, but you can also have a custom one as well. And you can actually render to very, very large pixel sizes from ArtMatic. It's worth understanding that because everything in ArtMatic is procedurally generated from mathematical functions, there is really no limit on how big you can actually generate things aside from the file size limits, but you can actually make huge images, huge pixel sizes, which is fantastic if you want to do high resolution printing. So I've actually printed images which are, you know, in excess of 10,000 pixels square, which is fairly large. When you change your formats here, by the way, if I change it to a square, you'll notice that your preview changes to a square so that you can actually see what your image is going to look like in ratio terms. I mostly stick around the 16:9 because I like that format. You can just enter, using the custom, you can just enter numbers in here and it will put in a custom size as well. The next thing down is the format that you actually send your image out in. It defaults into the PNG format, which is generally pretty good for what you want to do. We have also now a 16-bit version of PNG, which we can use. This is new to the CTX version. And then the standard TIFF, PDF, and JPEGs as well. And some height map things here. I won't explain what they are just at this time. We'll maybe do that in a more advanced session. But that just gives you your format for saving. So if you prefer a JPEG, just select JPEG there. We have a couple of other options that we can check here. One is to render all keyframes. ArtMatic allows you to create a number of keyframes, which you can see down the bottom here. I'll go into that in a little bit. This option will allow you, if you check that option, it'll allow you to do a save of each of the keyframes in turn. It's sort of like a batch render, if you like. So if you have like 10 keyframes there, it will do each of them at the resolution and the file formats that you set here. New to CTX is this option, which is 4x4 anti-aliasing. So anti-aliasing is a way of running down the image and creating a high resolution. It actually takes away kind of little jaggies and things if they should be there. You don't see them a lot in ArtMatic, to be honest. But sometimes if you get into very complex systems, you may see things that are could be a little bit more refined, and you can check that box. It will take some extra time to do that level of anti-aliasing. So you should keep that in mind when you do that. And for most purposes, you won't need to check that box. The next thing that you can see down here is a little cog and a file name. ArtMatic will save your file to the place where you were last working. So if you've saved your ArtMatic file into a folder, it's going to look for that folder to save your image. So this particular ArtMatic file came from Interface Basics. If I click on my render now, that's where it will be saved. One thing to keep in mind is that it's a little bit different to the older versions of the way that ArtMatic Designer worked, in that this file will always default to the name of whatever session you're running, and you can overwrite the file that is existing there. So if I was to save that and then save it again, I'd overwrite it. But there's a way that you can change that by clicking on the little cog icon, and it'll give you an option to put in a new file name here if you wish to do that. So if I was just to purely do this as we go now, it will render this image over the top of the image that I already had there, which in this case is exactly the same thing, but it is something to be aware of once you have several images down here, that you don't overwrite something accidentally. The next little segment we go to is the movie options. ArtMatic allows you to create animated sequences, which can be rendered as movies. This is also done here in the keyframe area, and these keyframes will then be ordered in sequence and rendered as a movie. So you have a few more options that you can choose here. Obviously, we have the mode, which is defaults to movie, which will generate a QuickTime movie, standard QuickTime movie. But you can also choose to render as a list of still images, and they can be either pings or TIFFs. Now, the reason that you may want to do this is really to do with high resolution rendering. If you have a particularly high resolution system that you're rendering a movie of ArtMatic, it can take quite a long time. And it's useful to be able to split the render up into series of pictures so that you can render it in little grabs, or you may just do it for safety. So if you're rendering overnight and you have a crash of your computer, or your power goes out, you'll still get whatever the last image was that you rendered before that event happened, and you don't lose anything. Whereas if you were to render as a movie and that happened, you'd lose the whole movie. So when you're in higher resolution things, it's a thing to keep in mind. Render as a list of pictures, and then you can stitch those pictures together with a number of different applications that will then turn them into a movie. I highly recommend that you get into the habit of doing that. It's just a much better way of working, and it's also the same way that Voyager, ArtMatic Voyager works. You can choose those options with Voyager because the rendering takes a fair bit longer. It's a more sophisticated way of doing it. Plus, it allows you to share your render out over several machines. If you've got a few machines, you can actually render from frame 1 to 100 on one machine and frame 101 to 200 on another machine, and you can do them simultaneously, so you literally halve your render time. So it's a good way of being able to do those kinds of things. Again, you have the size format here, you can and the ratio format. You can choose however you want your size and ratio to be here. That's pretty straightforward, pretty much the same as images. And again, you can set a custom size if you wish to do that. You can choose here the format that you want your movie to go at. It defaults to the standard H.264, which is Apple's main codec, but you can now select a couple of different things which haven't been available before. We can do Apple ProRes, and we can actually do two versions that have an alpha channel, which is different to the H.264, which has no alpha channel, and that can be very useful if you're wanting to composite your images in some way with some other another application, or even if you want to composite it with other ArtMatic sequences. You can also commit 4x4 anti-aliasing on a movie if you wish to do that, but once again, I would kind of caution you when you're using that setting, because that obviously increases your render time. When you're on a movie, that's increasing your render time on every single frame of that movie. So that's actually going to substantially increase your render time. So you might want to do a test before you do that, just to see whether it's that important to have that level of anti-aliasing working. And then once again, the file selection utility that just directs you to wherever you want to save your file, same as in the images. We have some extra things here. Obviously, when we're running on an animation, we have the ability to change our frames per second and where we're rendering from. Really, this part of the interface is not controlling the frames per second, nor does it control the length of the animation. So you kind of need to be a bit cautious here. what it is, because your animation length is actually set elsewhere, and I'll show you where you can do that. But what it is useful for is actually determining how much of a sequence you want to render. So whilst your frames per second, your frame rate is already set here, you can, and you can't change this. This is already set at 16 in this particular case, which is the default. But you can see I can't actually go up from that. I can go down, but not up. But what it does allow you to do is to determine a sequence. So I could go, for instance, from 10 seconds to 16 seconds, and you'll see that would render from 250 to 418 frames. Or you can just choose to render from 12 frames to 418 frames if you wanted to do that. So that's where you would, if you were trying to break your render up into sequences and doing it via a list of pictures, that's where you would set your sequences to the varying parts of your animation. You can also choose a soundtrack for your movie here. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You can, ArtMatic will actually generate sound according to various parameters. So in some cases, you may want ArtMatic to be creating the sound for your soundtrack. And in other cases, you can use a sound file, and ArtMatic can also take a sound file and use that sound file to change certain assigned parameters of the visual aspect to be working with the sound file. That's a more advanced thing, so maybe we'll talk about that in some later tutorial. But that would allow you to actually have a sound file which is driving changes in the image, and that can be quite a funky kind of thing to do as well. So that's our movie output and our image output on the left-hand side there. And the very last little icon that you'll see down here on the left-hand side is it's not going to be really important to us as we talk about the designer interface per se, because this is the link to ArtMatic Voyager. So if you're actually creating things in ArtMatic Voyager, Designer is the engine that allows you to control many of the aspects of creation in Voyager. And this link here would allow you to be working with Voyager and ArtMatic at the same time, and it allows you to see changes that you make inside ArtMatic, inside Designer, being updated in Voyager in real time. But for our purposes, we don't need to have this switched on because we're not at this time doing anything with Voyager. We're just looking at the ArtMatic interface. So that's the kind of little sidebar there. I'm whizzing through this because we have so many things that we can talk about here. So I'm trying to kind of get through it as quickly as I can. In the bottom part of the interface, you'll see that we have a fair few little options. Before, when I was talking about movies and where you set your options for movies, you want to do that here. And this little cog here will bring up a series of things that you can look at. We'll just not talk about these things just at the moment, but let's have a look at our animation and camera setup. When we bring up the animation setup, you'll see that we now have the option to set a few things. We can change here our duration of our animation. We can also change here our frame rate of our animation. And those things will be reflected. And let's just kind of commit that. And we'll go back and just have a look in the movies, and you'll see when we go back here now, our frame rate is 24 frames per second, and we've changed the time of our render. And that's where you control these things from this little animation and camera setup. There are some things we can control here with the way that the ArtMatic camera works. I won't go into explaining that at the moment because that'll be a little confusing. But just as a very, very quick overview, the view that you see in this window is basically looking down on what we call a Cartesian plane. So we have an x-axis that runs across, a y-axis that runs up, and ArtMatic's functions are performed as variations of things on the x and y axis. So we're looking down on that Cartesian plane that you probably first got bored with when you learned mathematics in high school. There is also a Z-axis in ArtMatic, and that Z-axis, or a Z-axis, as Americans say, and that Z-axis will run from your point of view sitting in front of your screen into the distance, so it kind of disappears off into the distance. It's important to understand that ArtMatic is not a 3D application, it's really a 2D application, but it does kind of talk usefully in 3D space. So there are certain kinds of things that we can actually do which make use of that Z-axis, of that depth axis, when we get into the functions of ArtMatic. But unlike Voyager, it's not realizing things in a fully 3D way. It is really just a 2D space. So when we're talking about, moving the camera in ArtMatic, we're really talking about where the camera is kind of tracking on the XY plane. So what I'm doing here is I'm just grabbing that plane and I'm dragging it around. But what I'm doing is dragging the X and Y axes around. And so whilst that little circle is staying in the middle of the X and Y axis, I'm dragging the X and Y axis center off the screen. We can always center to the middle of the Cartesian plane, the middle of X and Y, by hitting the home icon right down the bottom there. And we can actually zoom in and out as well. But when you see those options to talk about the camera envelope, that's kind of what we're talking about. You can see camera origin, X and Y, and the zoom level. So we're talking about animating those aspects of the camera view if we need to do that. Down the bottom of this, so we've seen that these are zooms here. There's another little icon here, which I'll explain while we're doing this. This is also new to CTX, and it's quite useful, but it's a little difficult to see it on this. So I'm just going to bring up another folder here. I'm just another file. I'm just going to look at something I was working on before. I hope you can see this on Zoom. It might not be that obvious, but as we saw before, if I click on this eye here, we'll get a full screen render of what we're doing in the ArtMatic work window. And you can see it kind of smooths out some of this kind of jaggy stuff here, because it is actually, this render we're seeing here is a lower resolution render. And when we click on a full screen render, we're seeing it in much better resolution. But this new icon allows us to render a higher resolution inside the workspace. And this is quite useful when you're working on things, because it just allows you to sort of see things at a better resolution as you're working without having to flip to full screen all the time. Just makes it a little bit better to be able to do that. So it's the same icon, but this one pertains to this part of the image rather than the full screen. So let's just bring back my little simple Gaussian circle again. Oh, actually, no, let's go back to that, because that'll help me with this next bit. You'll notice that down the bottom here, I have a number of keyframes filled in for this particular system of ArtMatic. And those keyframes can be used, as I said, to render a series of images, and also for an animation. At the moment, I'm just going to delete a couple of those because I noticed that they're exactly the same. At the moment, this particular system, I only use these as keyframes to find different places in this system that I like. But I could easily use it as an animation. Actually, to demonstrate that, I will go back into this simple circle. I'm just going to move my screen a bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you would run an animation just very quickly. So I can move this circle. I'm going to zoom out of the circle just a little bit, and I'm going to register a keyframe. I can do that just by clicking on that, or I could have just added it with an add here, or if I changed it, I could replace it. That's what these little things do. So I'm using some offsets here. I'm just going to move this circle a bit, and I'm going to add another keyframe, and you'll see we have a reflection of what we just did. And now I'm going to just move it again. Let's see, go that way. And I'll add another keyframe here. So now I have 3 keyframes, and I can run an animation of those three keyframes. If I hit the play, This animation will take place over the 20-second time that I previously had allocated to it. So you can see the circle is just going to move where I those keyframes. So this is a very useful and quick way of seeing what's happening in here. As systems get more and more complex, you'll find it's a lot harder to get a very good idea of what's going on inside this this frame, because this frame is trying to render all the data that's been calculated in the tree over here, and of course sometimes that can be a lot of data, and so it doesn't always keep up in time. There is a quick way of looking at it though, and that is again back in here. If you look at this preview, you can see that it basically is doing the same thing, and it will actually keep up a lot better if you're looking at it in this preview. So that's rendering it. It's going to take around about, oh, it's gone back to 16 seconds because I opened up another file. So these keyframes can be added. You can keep on adding keyframes right to the end. And this is a great way of getting from one place to another place in your ArtMatic system. It's pretty straightforward what these things do. The one that you might not quite know is insert. That puts a keyframe in between two keyframes, and it just doesn't interpolate between the values of one keyframe and another keyframe. That's very useful for doing animation, and we'll talk about that in some later episode, I think. For the moment, just be aware that that insert will actually make an interpolation between the two keyframes, I think after the keyframe you have selected, in fact. And clear and replace do pretty much exactly what they say, so there's nothing really fancy about that. This, there is another way to set the time of your animation, or the duration of your animation, and you can do it here by dragging. So I'm holding my mouse down and I'm dragging back and forwards on this little stopwatch icon. That will also set the duration of your animation. You can see I've set it at about, let's say, 19 seconds there. If we go back into our movie, we'll see that it's now 19 seconds, and that's a permanent setting for this particular thing. It won't change. I think you can, by holding down Option, I think you can get much finer gradations in this as well as you drag. It's a way of doing it, but I personally prefer just to set my durations in here, because you can set them very exactly rather than dragging back and forwards on a tiny little icon. So that's, I think that I've covered everything down here pretty well. I'm going to go up in the interface here and explain a little bit about what happens in this side. Now, this is where we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the power of ArtMatic. And this is, you know, where it can get quite daunting for people. The thing to keep in mind is, like many things, it's really a process of very slow accumulation. So if you take a look in one of Eric's designs, when you see one of his trees come up, let's just do that. We'll have a little look in something from the browser. Let's just have a little thing. We'll put this in the browser. Oh, I pick a really simple one. I'm trying for a really complex one. Let's try really one of these and see what happens. So you see a lot of things pop up here, and there are some what we call compiled trees here, and there's a bunch of little connections, and looking at that, you know, you might go, oh, I have no idea what's going on here. And to be truthful, I can look at this tree and I can go, I have no idea what's going on there either. Because I'd really need to sort of sit down and figure out what each of the components are doing, and look inside some of the compiled trees to see what this particular system was doing. It's not something that you can kind of just look at very quickly and understand in a second. But one of the things that I will tell you is that the way that this system arose would be really just have been a process of updating and adding. So it would have started out as a fairly simple system like this, and we would have gone through and added things and terminated things and put some mixes in and things like that. So Don't get really daunted when you see the complex trees. They can be very simple and they can be very effective at being very simple, and they can be incredibly complex with a lot of things going on. But, you know, it's not something that you should kind of go, I'll never get to that level of expertise. I can tell you that if you persevere and you do things kind of deliberately and slowly, you will. Because, you know, once I was a very, very, very newbie starter and I didn't understand a thing about this interface, and I've managed to get on top of it to a fair degree. All right, so let's have a look at these things across the top here. The very first thing that you see here, the top left-hand side, is the structures presets icon. When we click on this, we see a variation of things that we can use, which are kind of starting points for certain kinds of systems. They can be useful, and to be honest, I don't use them a lot because I'm probably building things that I need different things to be starting from, so I don't use them a lot, but they can be useful. So certain kinds of things like the simple connections like this are very useful to start with, just to play with and see where they go and what they do. It's a good way of just seeing, well, what does this function do and what does that function do? So these simple trees are very good to just play with and have a look at. Some of them show you things like the mixers. So this is a system which is showing you how a mixer works. So there's many reasons that you might want to just grab a structure tree and try them. I'm just going to keep popping back to my little simple Gaussian dot though, because we can demonstrate some things very easily with this. Underneath the structures, the selection for the structures tree, underneath that icon, we have a group of icons which allow you to make various kinds of connections in the tree. Now, I'm just going to show you what some of these, what each of these things does. We won't get into it in any detail. That's probably something for the next lesson that we do, where we'll show you how to build some simple trees and what the bits and pieces are actually doing. But here I'm just going to run through what the actual things themselves do. So the first one is an X, and that means delete. And it's just going to delete whatever you have selected. The selected icons, or the selected algorithms, will appear circled in green or highlighted in green. So that's how you know they're actually active and selected. And also the thing that I just did then was I made an undo, you would have noticed, which is the standard Control Z, which means that it'll just undo the last thing that you did. CTX now has 4 levels of undo, which means that we can go 4 steps back. So 4 things that you've done, you can go 4 steps back and undo them, which is a step upwards from what we used to be able to do. So that's a big improvement. The next icon down here, and you'll see again, just I'll point that out again, when we scroll over these things, you'll see that the functions are outlined beneath you there on the tooltips. This is insert below. So this will now insert an algorithm below the one that you're working on. It will almost always try and make an intelligent guess as to what it is that it thinks you want to do. In this particular case, we have 2 outputs. Oh, I should explain also how these little tiles work. So the 2 little green dots at the top there and those 2 white dots below, these represent the inputs and the outputs to that particular tile. So this one has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. This tile below has 2 inputs and 1 output. And those outputs and inputs are really telling you what can be connected and the best strategies for connecting things inside the tree. So when I do an insert below, it'll try and make a guess, and because it can see there's 2 outputs there and there's 2 outputs there and 2 inputs there, it'll probably try and connect them with something that has 2 ins and 2 outs. And that's indeed what it actually does do. Oopsie, that was the wrong one. What I just clicked then was the one that puts a tile above, and it will also try and do that intelligently. So that's putting a tile above, and that's putting a tile below. The next little gadget here will actually try and put in two tiles that are connected together. I have to confess that I don't use this very much because most of the time it doesn't do the things that I need it to do, but I'm sure there are reasons that that would be useful. But it will try, it'll basically take the tile you're on and put two tiles and connect them together in some way below it. So in various kinds of systems, there's various kinds of way of channeling the data. And so if we were in a different kind of system from this one, it might try and connect two images together, for instance. In this case, it's just connected to space alteration tiles together. And it's done them in an intelligent way. It's actually figured out what the best solution for that is. I'm going to get rid of both of these. You can also delete tiles just by hitting the delete key on your keyboard. So you don't have to use this to delete a tile. You can just use delete to do that. The very next tile that you see here is a branching tile. And what this allows you to do is to connect a tile to the one that you're on as a side branch. This tile is actually very useful in many, many ways. You find as you get into a more complex system where you're needing various side chains to affect what you're doing, you'll use this a lot. There are key commands for many of these things as well. The key command for that is B, which is just branch. That will allow you to do that. Key commands for connections come into play with keys like if I want to put in a two tile connection below this one, I hit the 2 key, it will do that. If I want 1, I hit the 1 key, it will do that, but you'll notice the terminations are now not quite right. So there are a lot of things to do. We won't get to that because that's a complex rabbit hole. And the very last thing on this structures connection thing is a joining structure. And so what this does, it will try and terminate your structure. So at this particular point, the ArtMatic tree is not terminated in an intelligent way. So what we're really seeing here is just the output of the left-hand side of the tree. This component that we put in here actually not contributing at all to the image in the screen. And generally speaking, that's what you'll see when you have an ArtMatic tree that's not properly terminated. You'll just see the left-hand side. Whatever's the lowest tile on the left-hand side will be what you're seeing the output of on the screen. To terminate those tiles, to make it meaningful to ArtMatic, we would do this. And it will try and make a meaningful termination. And you can see here what it's done. It's just added the output of these two tiles. This one here is a sideways gradation, you can see there, and that's the Gaussian circle that we had. Just to make that a little more obvious, I'm going to put in another of those Gaussian circles. They're now superimposed on top of one another, but if I offset one of them just a tiny bit, you'll see that there are actually two circles there. And they're joined in the way that the maths tells them to join in this component. So here you can see they're kind of merged together because it's doing an average of the two output tiles. That kind of leads me to the next little explanation. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this because it is a really big topic. And that is to tell you something about the way the color is determined on this screen at this stage. And that will take us up to this part of the interface. At the moment, you can see that this is largely black and white. And the reason for that is we have a color palette selected, which is black and white. ArtMatic allows you to change your color palettes and choose from a whole lot of different presets. And you can also store your own presets as well inside here. These are gradients. And these gradients are actually mapped across the values of the output here. Now, one thing that I'll briefly mention is that there are a couple of ways, actually there are a few ways that ArtMatic actually manages color. And one of them has to do with the linear gradient mapping of color. And most of the time you'll see that in effect when there's only one output on your main tree. So one output on the main tree tells the designer engine that what you're doing is working with gradient-based color. And when that happens, you have access to these color lookup tables. And there are various ways that these color lookup tables can be implemented. And that's what you see here. A whole heap of variations on the way that the color lookup tables determine what you're going to see on your image. It's just a linear color lookup table. It's just referring to this gradient in a linear fashion. The other ones have got various esoteric uses, and I'm not going to go into them. I don't even understand them all myself. But you'll see that there are a bunch of things that you can actually assign. It's good fun to play with them to see what the effects are. But they will always refer to this color lookup table, these gradients, and these shaders in some way or another. So, and as I said, that's on a gradient-based output, which is one output on the bottom tile. There's another way that ArtMatic looks at color, and that is through an RGB system, in which case I will show you this very briefly because I don't want to get too bogged down in this. But I'm just going to make this into an RGB system just to show you something. This system now has 3 outputs, and designer knows automatically that when you've selected something with 3 outputs, that you are now wanting to work in RGB space. So that's red, green, blue space. You're working now by manipulating the pixels in ArtMatic directly rather than using the color lookup tables. And you will notice straight away that something happened here, and that is we lost all our colors. And if we look at the gradients here and we select different gradient patterns here, you'll notice it has absolutely no effect on the color that you're seeing in the main workspace screen. And the reason for that is that you've told ArtMatic, by having these 3 outputs, that you want to be working in RGB space. You'll also notice that you've lost your variation in color lookup tables here. We've now just gone into RGB selections, of which there are a group of different ones. There are ways that these gradients can actually be referred into the RGB space. So you can bring the gradients back into RGB space using various kinds of components. But we won't go into that. It's a very advanced side of things. But for the purposes of this kind of basic interface tour, the thing to just remember is if you've got 3 outputs at the bottom of your tree, 3 or 4 at the bottom of your tree, you're going to be RGB space. And if you have 1, you're going to be in the gradient color lookup table space. So let's go down a little bit further here. I won't explain what the depth queuing is and the global shade. Again, these all refer to the way that the tables work and the way that color is allocated into gradients. And they have many, many uses. You see Eric use them a lot with fractals, and that's probably one of the biggest uses for them, where you can assign parts of the gradient of the image you're looking at to various parts of a fractal space. And they also work that way when you're using Voyager and fractals in Voyager as well. You can actually map colors to the gradients of something, which can be translated across to Voyager into an object, so you can see different colors on different aspects of the object. I'm just going to jump up to the top of the tree here because some of these things are kind of repeated in various parts of the interface. Here you will notice that you can insert a variation of different things into the tree. Many of these things were covered here and are covered by key commands, but there are a few things that just kind of a slight bit different, where you can actually determine what you're going to connect. You can connect a one output tile, or you can connect a 3 output tile, depending on you know, how you wish that to be. Once again, I don't use this very much because I now pretty much use various other ways of connecting the tiles, but it is a useful thing to have there. There's a function called replace. Now this allows us to replace the component in various ways for various reasons. We can split the component, which will just split it into 2 pieces. It will try and do that intelligently because some components are quite complex and it doesn't always know exactly what it is you're intending to do. But most of the time it will actually make an intelligent choice. And you can replace them with various other kinds of components. Some of these things might look like repetition, and in fact they are. But there are generally reasons for that to be the case. You can also make a group, which is what we saw over here. That's what that function is. And some of these functions are actually not here because they're not available to the kind of tile we have selected. So some things are tile based. The selections, you can make a tile base, and it will only allow you to do that if the correct tile is selected. Up at the top here, these little buttons you see here are to do with the way that ArtMatic's inputs are selected. When you're working with a simple space transform like this one, this is a 2-dimensional space transform, which is the 2 input kind of function. It will always be connected to, predictably, the X and Y space. It's the X and Y axis, so that's what it's going to connect to. If you have something with a Z or a Z axis in it, if it was 3 inputs, for instance, let's have a look at 3 inputs, it automatically connects to the Z input as well, so that you've got that extra dimension, which is the one that travels from you through the screen off into the distance. And then there are a group of other inputs as well, and these have various kinds of uses. To do with, some of them to do with the way that time comes into the system. When you're doing animations, you can actually have the stream of time influencing your animation. Things can happen over a period of time, and you can have a modulation happening over time. And the A1 through A4 connections give you constants, which you can use to set constants coming into the ArtMatic system if you need to do that. Once again, this is kind of getting a little bit more outside the realms of what I want to go into at the moment, but they have many uses, particularly once you get into the Voyager side of things, where you wanted to control ArtMatic systems very, very accurately. And the last thing above here is my Zoom thing is kind of eclipsing a bit of my interface, so I hope this is not freaking you out too much. Is to do with the tree and the naming of the tree and the way the tree kind of functions. So let's just look at these things. There are key commands for most of these things, but we'll just look at them on the menu. So copying a tile just allows you to take that tile. It's now gone into a copy, like into the conventional copy. And if I have the right tile made here, I can now, remember I copied that, I can now paste that back again using the paste function. So, or by pasting it here, you'll see that if I just move that to something else, I now have the option to paste whatever I've copied. So this copy paste will work between any 2 tiles of the same kind. So if I wanted to copy this one, and these work on the standard Apple key command. So copying that, I can paste it back in there, just as you would with any kind of copy paste. Any 2 tiles with the 2 in and 2 out, I can do that too. If I wanted to copy that one, I have to have another 3 in, 2 out to do that too. So you can copy in between the tiles. This becomes incredibly powerful when we get to what we call compiled trees or compiled components, where we can actually copy large groups of components together and put them from one place in the tree to another place in the tree. And that becomes a very, very powerful way of working when you're inside of ArtMatic Designer. Delete tile, that's straightforward, we've already done that. Send tile to the main output. That, you notice that just didn't work. It doesn't make sense actually to what we're trying to do in this particular case. So ArtMatic doesn't know what to make of it, but it's trying to send it to an output tile. That has uses. We won't go into why at this stage. You can move the tiles around here. Also, you'll notice there are key commands for most of these things. So you can move the tiles around. I can send a tile down or send a tile up. I'm not sure it'll work. Let's try it down here. No, because we have a very kind of compact tree here, but in some cases the tree starts to get a little bit kind of spindly and you can move tiles around. You can move a tile left and right. And this is useful for just neatening up your tree or trying to, you know, make things make sense. Sometimes when you make an automatic tile in Designer, it will make a tile which kind of overlaps other tiles, and you might just want to get this out of the way. You can move these again with key commands, which makes it quite a bit faster if you can get that under your belt. Compacting the tree can grow in kind of ungainly ways, and compacting the tree just allows you to make it come back to as compact as it can. It won't have any effect right now, again, because this is not a particularly spindly or ungainly tree, so everything's pretty compacted the way it is, but they can get kind of pretty leggy and have a lot of bits and pieces to them, so it's always a good idea to, every now and then, I just always hit the C key and it will just bring the tree back into some shape. Here we make a new compiled tree. Now a compiled tree is signified by this little 4-tile gadget. And this compiled tree is the kind of tree that has things inside it. So it's like a container, if you like. I'm also not going to go into that in any detail, but I will tell you that I can now look inside this compiled tree by typing the E key on your keyboard. And now we'll see the component that was there before. It's actually put that component inside a little container. And this container can have lots of components. And more than that, this container can have other containers. So you can see that that can become quite a powerful and also very complex little way of doing things. So it's good to kind of keep track of that stuff. I'm not going to go into that. That'll be the next lesson. We'll talk about how those things work. But that's just to show you that that's what that means. You can also open compiled trees from elsewhere and save compiled trees. And as I said, you can copy and paste compiled trees. So I could, let's just show you how that works. I could just put in a couple more components inside that compiled tree. And as I'm just telling you, I'm typing the E key to jump in and out of that, to toggle. And then I could copy this, and then I could paste it into another 3 in, 2 out place. And using the E key again, this component is now selected. I can go inside there and you'll see it's the same things as I have in here. I could change this to something else, and I could change this to something else. And you'll see that I have now one compiled tree that looks like this and one compiled tree that looks like that. So they're completely different. And so that copy paste thing works extremely well, and you can also copy paste across ArtMatic systems. So if I was to quit this particular system and go into another system, I could copy paste between those two. And that's a very, very powerful and useful tool. And the last, input matrix setup. This shows you what that window that you saw come up before, which shows you how to get inputs connected into the top of your ArtMatic tree and where things influence things from inside the tree. I'm not going to go into that because that's a rabbit hole as well. But maybe again in the next lesson we'll go into that. And the very last thing that you can see down here is to rename the compiled tree. This is a really good habit to get into because you can get, as you can see, quite confused with what could be in these trees. Once you see some of the very complex systems, you have like 20 or 30 of these compiled trees. They could be doing all kinds of different things. And when you've named your compiled tree, you'll see the name of the tree appears down here when you mouse over it. So it just helps you understand what you're doing in a system. If I put my mouse over this one, it's not named, so it's called Untitled. But what you want to avoid is having like 20 of those called Untitled, because that doesn't really give you any clue as to where you might be going. So just that's kind of a basic tour of this part of the interface. I'm going to drop down to the bottom here. The random part of the interface, which many people know and love, and this is what we call the Zen aspect of ArtMatic. This allows us to play with ArtMatic in a very kind of intuitive and fun way, where we can change various aspects of the interface just by clicking on some dice. The first one randomizes colors and shaders, and this will only work when you're in the one output part of ArtMatic where it's referencing the color lookup tables, and it will just basically choose from all of the available bits and pieces of the color lookup tables to give you different looks of the colors. It doesn't change anything in the actual system, just the colors. On the other side, we have a dice which will allow you to randomize parameters. And by hitting this, what it's doing is it's randomizing all the parameters inside each of these tiles into something else. So if we just look at one of these and I hit randomize, you'll notice that it's jumping around on these little setups here now. This can sometimes give you great things, sometimes nothing. In this particular system, there's a lot of black, so it's jumping all over the place with all the bits and pieces of the Cartesian plane, so it's not really that helpful. And randomize all doesn't quite do what it says. It randomizes both of these things, and it randomizes the things that are inside the existing tree. So it's actually randomizing each of these tiles, and it's randomizing that, and it's randomizing that. What it actually isn't doing is randomizing the whole system like I'm doing now with Magic Voodoo. And the way that I'm doing that, just in case you want to have a really, really high level Zen experience, is I'm holding down the control key and I'm clicking on the main dice. That's a little hidden thing that people don't often come across. And that's randomizing everything. So that's actually randomizing your colors, it's randomizing your tree, it's randomizing your parameters, it's doing everything. Once again, note that the colors will not randomize according to these tables unless there's only one output on this tree. Otherwise, it's just going, now it's in RGB space, so the colors don't have anything to do with this up here. So that's your little kind of dice effect there. To the right of the dice, we have a mutations tree. And when you click on this, you'll get a new window, and it gives you a series of random images that follow a gradual change in each of the parameters that are available to change. This is quite useful in many, many circumstances, and I will go into that on a more advanced tutorial at some stage. When I said that it randomizes all the available things here, what that means is that it will only randomize things that are unlocked, where the parameters are unlocked. And by that, it will take us to the next thing that I'm going to explain, which are these little locks that are down the side here. And you'll notice that in some cases, these locks are red, and in some cases, they're not locked at all. And you'll notice by clicking on them, you can lock a particular aspect of that particular tile. And so when you do that, the mutation tree will no longer mutate those particular parameters. Neither will the dice mutate those particular parameters. They are now locked out of the randomization process. A lot of the time, I use the locked components, locked parameters to work because I don't want things to change at all unless I tell them to. And one way of usefully doing that is to shift click on the locks, and they'll go red all the locks will go red when you shift click on them. So every single thing you've got in the system will go red. Likewise, if you shift click that way, everything will now be unlocked. That's just a little thing to keep in mind. Then just at the bottom here, we're going to talk about very quickly, because I think we're getting close to the end of our time here. I'm going to talk about the parameters themselves. These are the attributes of any particular tile that you have selected in the ArtMatic tree. And you can change, each one of them is dependent on what tile that is, and you can change them by dragging, or you can type something in the little dialog here, and that will change to whatever you've typed, or to the available values if you type in something that was silly like I just did then. So that's the two ways that you can manipulate those things, just by dragging them. You also can click on each of these parameters and do various things with them. I'm not going to go through all of these things because some of them are a little bit esoteric at this point. But the ones that you may want to know are these two. Reset to default, which will reset the parameter to its nominal default, and reset all to default, which will reset all the parameters in that particular tile to their nominal default. That's quite a useful thing to know how to do, because sometimes you'll wander a little bit far away from where you want to be, and you're thinking, well, I really just want that back to where its defaults were, and that's the way you do it. When you create new tiles, they'll always come up with their default value. You can see if I change the default values, and I keep changing the default values, I could lose track of where I am. But to get back to default is very simple. Just reset all to default, and that's where it'll take you. Some tiles will have an option down the bottom here too, which you can change what the actual tile behavior is. And these things will be different for all the different kinds of parameters and tiles that have on offer. We have like a lot of capabilities. I can't remember now, but I think it's about 700 tiles or so that we can choose from in ArtMatic. And by clicking on a tile, you'll see there's a lot of different kinds. What I did then, by the way, was that was a control click on the tile. You can see all the different kinds of tiles that I can put in there. And once I stick a tile in there, I have the option to go to all the different variations on those particular parameters, the 3 in 2 out tiles. So you can see there's a lot of options there, a lot of things that you can choose from. And I'm not really going to go into an explanation of those things at this point. That'll be something for a bit further on. But I think, Caleb, have I done everything there? Is there anything else that you think I should just talk about there? Or John?
I think, I mean, for me, you hit all the core aspects of the product, the areas, all the buttons, and then you gave me a few extra keyboard commands. And like, I didn't know about the tile family, which I think was Control and Shift. And so I just look forward to finding out more about keyboard commands in the future. Could you repeat which command you did to get the family type?
When you're in a tree like this, let's make it very simple. So there are many ways of actually adding tiles. It's obviously, this is a very simple way, but as you get into more advanced kind of tree building, you'll find that there are certain things that you want to do a lot. And so I might want to, for instance, here I'm going to say, all right, I want to start with a picture that I have. I'm going to make an image-based file, an image-based system rather, and I want to manipulate an image. So straight away, I already know that those particular tiles are a 2 in 3 out or a 2 in 4 out image, or black and white, they're a 2 in 1 out image. So I know that I need to go elsewhere from 2 in 2 out. Now what I could do is I could just add a 3 input tile to the bottom of that. I can also replace it, and I'm going to hold down my control key, and I will get this menu, this dialog, which enables me to choose from all the possible variations that ArtMatic Designer is going to allow me to put in there. And I'll replace that tile entirely by choosing a 2 in 3 out. Straight away, I have a 2 in 3 out, and I know in this family of tiles is where the image picked input is. and you can see it brings in the default UI software image, but I just know that that's where it is. So that's a quick way of knowing that that's what I want to have happen. So maybe, the next tile I want is going to be a 4 out, and I can just type my 4 key and it would automatically put in a 4 output tile, but I might want to change it to a 3 for some reason. So now I can just do that. It will automatically change it back to a 3. That was, again, hitting Control and holding down Control while I select the tile. It's a very fast way of building your trees.
The image tile is one of the great cheats in the application. I say cheat, but I mean that with great affection, because yes. I've taken a lot of trees where I've rendered out something and then brought it back, that image back in.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
wonderful.
It's a huge time saver, because if what you're trying to do is make something and then do kaleidoscopic type things or any of that, you can sort of lock down the piece you want to lock down.
Sure.
As an image, and then bring it back into the other thing. So
yeah,
that's a good one to play with.
Yeah, obviously, that's one of the terrific things. You can output an image from whatever you're working on, and then that then exists as an image. So you can bring it back into here and use it for something else. Better than that, you can do it with movies as well. And why might you want to do that? There are lots of reasons why you might want to do that. You can actually have an animated movie controlling things that are being represented in your ArtMatic structure in a different way. So it's a very, very powerful little tile. We'll talk about this in depth. In fact, we could probably do a whole tutorial on it, but I'm just going to show you something really quickly. So we have a bunch of different kinds of image options that we have here. I have to move my interface again. I'm just going to go 3 and 4 out. Let's see. I mean, 2 and 4 out. Oops, what am I doing? I can't, my interface is being kind of hidden by some of the Zoom stuff here. So I don't know what happens when I drag it around, whether you can see
You can drag the Zoom window around.
Can you? I don't
the gallery.
Oh, okay. I tried that a minute ago and I couldn't, obviously grabbing the wrong part of it. Okay, so this is an image tile again. It looks exactly the same as what we had, but this one's got an alpha channel in it, and that's a really useful thing to have available. Plus, we can actually change this to a blurred version of that as well, and that's very useful. Takes a little bit more time to render, but it is actually quite useful. And the other kind we have is a 2 in 1 out, which gives us a grayscale image, and that can also be blurred. And you'll notice that one of the things that happens straight away, because this is a 1 out tile, it now has reference to the color lookup tables, and it's rendering our image, our mono image, which is just black and white, into whatever colors are selected here in the tables and the gradient things. That can be quite a lot of fun. You can do some really, really cool things with that. So just remember that 1 output there refers to these tables, but that can be a picture, and you can do lots of fun things with that as well.
Yeah.
And we'll go into there's a lot of this. I might do at some stage a tutorial about the power of using images inside of ArtMatic and how wonderful it is just as an image manipulation tool, because there's a lot of power in there. We've got lots of color tools that we can use. We have lots of ways of manipulating the space of an image. We can also do some things where we can map images onto pseudo 3D objects. So it's quite useful in various aspects, being able to bring in images and output them again. You can also create sprites for Voyager by using the image tools here. So it's got a lot of really cool things that can be done in that aspect of the interface.
I agree that the product is very deep and very wide. And the more obvious things is the doing fractals and abstracts, but as a sort of a different way of thinking about Photoshop, a different way of thinking about video editing, it has all those functions and capabilities with it. So I'd love in some future episodes if maybe we can do one just on photography and one on video, to give an extra flavor, an extra branch to the power the designer has. I think there's a fair amount of abstract art and it'd be nice to see some of those other applications be presented.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be talked about. You know, just in aspects of the control over color and all kinds of manipulations of the space. I mean, you know, people quickly find that you can do kaleidoscopic tricks and things with the way that ArtMatic works, and it's very sophisticated in doing that. In fact, I don't think there's anything that's actually anywhere near as sophisticated as ArtMatic Designer for making kaleidoscopic kinds of things. You can do them in all sorts of different ways. There's many aspects of it. So that's one thing. But Eric's added some really interesting new tools just recently, which enable you to do things like map images back into the what we call the reflection characteristics and the specularity characteristics of derivative functions, which gives you the ability to make kind of metallic surfaces and objects that look like they're reflecting the environment that they're in or refracting the environment that they're in. And you can do that by mapping an image back into that system. So they are incredibly versatile.
The thing you're doing right here too with this sort of glow effect on the image, being able to animate the color palette in the cycling lets you do effects that would be really hard to do in something else.
Yes, absolutely. Very quickly too. You can do amazing things very quickly. And some of the things that some of the film clips that I've done where for some of my music projects where the best, most efficient and most sophisticated way of actually achieving certain effects was to do them through image manipulation tools. One of the clips that I did has a very long track across, which is basically along an infinite wall, and I had a repeating wallpaper pattern, and I achieved that in ArtMatic. To do it in anything else is actually really time-consuming and annoying, and I did it in ArtMatic in a few seconds. It's that easy.
Wow.
You know, it is a tool that has a lot of application outside of you know, just creating images inside the app. You can do some really cool other image manipulation things. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I look forward to us, as this is the first episode of UNI University, I look forward to each week us adding to that body of knowledge and really allowing people to explore whole new ways of using Designer and Voyager that they hadn't considered before. And that might not be readily apparent to the casual user.
Yes, it is. I mean, I'm an evangelist from way back, and I will really sing the praises of these apps because I think, you know, the power and the depth of both Voyager and Designer are not, you know, well exploited. They are more powerful than I even have reason to investigate. Each time I use Designer, I'm boggled by the depth that I still could dive to if I really wanted to. It's very easy for me to spend an entire day just going wow and oh, what more wow? I'm down 5 levels of wow now, you know. So,
well, and this is really an application where learning the basics, you know, everything you've gone through today is critically important because you can impress your friends and family easily with the dice. And you go into Zen mode and you just keep hitting it until you find something you like and you can tweak it a little bit and you will have a stunning piece. You click it enough and you will run across something really wonderful. But even the basics are, you can do amazing things with not that much work. And when you start to learn how to really drive the thing with intent, it becomes a really powerful tool.
oh, it is, you know, I'll be the first to say, like, there's nothing wrong with kind of touring around in the Zen mode. You know, I love it. I still do it. You know, every now and then I'll just kind of sit there and go, "What? I just want that experience." I really truly love it. And I started out that way. You know, it was one of the things that really grabbed me early on was that I could actually get some fantastic looking things, but it can't be underestimated, the feeling that you get when you first control your first system and you start building something and you go, I made that and I know how that's doing what it does. And from that moment on, you're a fully committed addict. You won't get out of it. You know, that's when you're in deep. And now, you know, it's a joy for me to work in the application, because I'm not exaggerating when I say that every single time I sit down with this application, I'll discover new things and think of new ideas. I mean, it's as malleable as you want it to be, because there's always something new you can actually do with it, because you have such control over every little aspect of the interface. So, you know, still going, still happy after, well, I've been with it for now 20 something years. So,
well, and I think you mentioned last week that Eric, who's written the software and knows it better than any of us, still gets stumped sometimes when he sees something. It's how to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know, and so do we all. You know, Eric posted up something yesterday on the Facebook group, and I went, "What the?" And I looked at it and I said, I don't even understand what he's done. And then he made a description of it, and he said something about the 3:2 illumination component. And I went, right. And there's a new component in this last version that we're just looking at now. He's put in a new component, and it's a great component because it allows you to take derivatives and put in 3 lights, what we call light sources. They're not really light sources, but three illumination directions. And I don't know if you've seen a bunch of the fractal stuff he's been doing lately, but he's using those to kind of light these different directions. It's a really lovely tool. So yeah, there's always a thing, you know, there's always something new.
I've figured out the whole thing. Wait a minute, what's that? What's that thing in the corner?
No. Yeah. I estimate at this current point in time, I probably know about it, you know, 100th of what there is to know in ArtMatic, and I consider myself a pretty advanced user.
Yeah.
And
I'm nowhere near that.
Go to the About and open up that window, and let me see what the current number is of components.
Where is that?
In the ArtMatic Designer About. Oh,
in the About. Okay. There we 700 components.
723, 34, and then there's
2,382 possible combination. Oh, not combinations. Parameters. I think that was. What was that? Look at that again. Functions. Okay, no functions. Okay, so some components have more than one function. Mm-hmm. They can actually have multiple ways of functioning.
From a Russian doll nesting standpoint, would you say tile is equivalent to component? Is that a one-to-one relationship?
Probably, yeah. We should probably have kind of terminologies for these things. I just kind of flip back and forth. So this is a component. So a component, algorithm, tile. They're all the same kind of thing. And then when we make them into compiled components, we can kind of call a component a compiled component, but we're inside it, it's a compiled tree because it's a whole new tree, if you like. I'll try and keep on top of the terminology as much as I can, but I tend...
No problem. I'm just thinking from, if any new folks are watching this YouTube video on the introduction, the tree is the overall structure. Each part of the structure is a tile, which has a relationship with a component which contains a series of one or more functions that
one of these
in that family.
More than, so if you see, let's just put in, I'll just put in a mirror function here, a branch end. What you'll see is that that is one component, right? But if we look down here, we have certain functions we can assign to that component, so we can make its mirroring go in or out according to various axes. So I think that's what he means by there being various functions. So that component, whilst it's what we call the branch end mirror, it has its own parameters down here, but it also has a subset of things that it can do as well. And there are a bunch of different components that can do that. They'll have, according to what they are, they'll have different ways of functioning themselves. I think that's what he means by there being lots of different functions.
Yeah, I think I was setting up the online help back in October and going through that long list and having to create the HTML, and there was a number of different function sets within each component. And
yeah, well, that's actually just reminds me of something too. I should point out now, this is a new thing in ArtMatic, and that is that if you type Command F when you're inside, can you see that screen that just came up, or do I have to allocate that to?
No, I didn't see it. It's Bobby behind our heads.
Okay, so when I select a component now and I type Command F, what it does is it brings up your browser, whatever browser you default to, and it will give you all the information you need for that component, which is fantastic, because it means that while you're working on something, you can say, oh, how does that work? And Command F, and you'll get a description of exactly what that component entails and what it's doing. And the other thing I should mention at the same time is the online help, which is up here, which takes us to the documentation and the content library and updates and so forth. So those two things are important to actually know about as well.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you so much, Peter, for this introductory class. I know the application, you know, a beginner level, a little deeper maybe than that, but I still learned stuff today that I did not know about, especially a few key commands. And you really gave me a holistic perspective of what being a new user to Designer is like and jumping in.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. And next week, what I intend to do is go through how we build trees, and we'll go through, and there'll be a bunch of other things. That's when you'll start seeing a lot of the kind of under the hood stuff and ways to put things together. I'll talk about how things connect. I will talk about the different sorts of components that we have and what they actually mean in the grand scheme of things. One of the things to understand is that they're all mathematical operators. So sometimes a component can actually have more than one function, depending on what kind of tree you're in. So there's a great deal of stuff to cover, and I imagine that whatever we talk about next week might actually go into 2 whole lessons, because there's so much to cover. And that'll just be at a basic, will still be a basic level at that point. We may go into some more complex stuff later, but I think what I'd really like to do is give people a very good understanding at basic level of the breadth of ArtMatic and the kinds of great things that it contains, and get the enthusiasm up for taking that big leap away from the Zen mode and going, I can actually build things now. Because it's, you know, it is a big leap, but it isn't as hard as you think it might be.
That's a great piece of advice. I know I ran away from digging in deeply into the tree for a long, long time, and spending a month building the online catalog of, you know, the online components catalog is what made me finally make that leap, because now I'm reading all these components and parameters, and I could say, oh, that's how I do that. Oh, that's how I do that. And like you said, the excitement level of knowing that I had that empowerment and could launch into the program and really get under the hood was fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to thank you again, and thank you, John, for joining. We had one other guest joining. I think they just had their video off, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the recording and go ahead and repost this up on YouTube and let everybody know it's available up there. And again, just thank you so much for all your wisdom and knowledge.
Thanks, John. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Cheers.
See ya.